All right, so I'm going to talk today. I'm not going to give you a speech and I'm not going to give you a presentation. I'm going to tell you a story. And this story is going to weave through a lot of different things that all of you are involved in. All of you are experts in your fields, and I've talked to many of you in the last 24 hours, and I'm impressed with your depth of knowledge and your understanding. What I do, I'm an integrator. I put things together so you can see how the big picture works and how that fits into the small picture. So let's see if this will work, and we'll move forward. That didn't work. Okay, let's try that. There we go. So I'm going to talk about how the drone is the machine gun of the 21st century. Now, what this means to you is you have to change your mindset. Too many of us think of these systems as individual systems, not connected. But we have to think of them a little differently. So this briefing is unclassified. Everything that I do here and all my presentations are open source. And by the way, I can give presentations to your teams if you contact me by MS Teams or in person, and none of this is classified. So how many of you heard about the Second Nagorno-Karabakh War? It's very good, sir. Thank you very much. Hope you enjoyed that book. My point in writing 7 Seconds to Die, which is the history of the Second Nagorno-Karabakh War, was to explain to people how we need to pay attention to this conflict. 44-day decisive victory, Azerbaijan against Armenia. Peer competitors, but Azerbaijan took some of their defense money and they bought some purchases of loitering munitions and of drones across the spectrum, and they were able to tip the scales in such a way that the fighting by Armenia didn't matter. Now imagine this, Armenia held the high ground for 26 years. 26 years they had put defensive positions in, barbed wire, minefields, trenches, and it didn't matter because the Azerbaijanis were able to tip the scales. Now the whole war was not won just by robotic systems, but it was the first war in history that was primarily won by robotic systems. And how come we don't know that? I briefed every general in the US Army on this about 2 years ago, and very few of them knew about this war. And very few had had a chance to study it in depth. And one of the reasons for that is because oftentimes we think certain things don't rise to the level of our need to understand. Azerbaijan, Armenia, I mean, small fight, distant place, not important. Not so, not so. And you saw there how Azerbaijan leveraged their robotic systems to win that war. In the first 48 hours, they completely destroyed the Armenian air defense system. And then they started to destroy from air defense. They started to destroy command and control, artillery, then tanks, then armored vehicles of all types, then wheeled vehicles, and then troops. By the middle, the war started on 27 September 2020. By the middle of October, they were hunting troops because they'd run out of targets. You know, they'd run out of command posts and artillery systems to destroy. So they were able to do a tremendous victory in 44 days. And it was because of their robotic systems. Now, they finally won the war with a very, very bold infiltration attack. And infiltration now is the method of war of the 21st century. And I can explain that later. But what we need to do is study these wars. Now, one thing I forgot, the comment here by this Armenian soldier is the worst thing that you ever want to hear from your soldiers. There was nowhere to hide and no way to fight back. Can you imagine? They're in their trenches and they're afraid 24/7 about a drone coming down on them. And I have videos that show loitering munitions dropping in on them at night. And someone is taking a video with their smartphone because they hear it diving like a Stuka dive bomber from World War II. The sound is tremendous and it's coming down. And they don't know where it's going to hit and it lands nearby. So the fear that this caused was amazing. It paralyzed the Armenian army. They've never recovered. Now, if I showed you this picture 10 years ago, you might think it was some science fiction story about an alien who'd come down from some other planet. But this is a FPV, first-person view drone operator in Ukraine. Warfare is changing. We need to change our mindset. Now, many of you are on board with this and understand how the mindset needs to change. All things are ready if our minds are so. So said Henry V. Well, Shakespeare, actually. But think about it. We have to think before we act. So our challenge right now is to fix our mindset, to understand what's going on. Now, I have studied war all my life. I study every day what's going on in the battles of the world. I spend hours looking at what's happening in Ukraine and what's going on in the Middle East, in the Red Sea, and other places. And from my study, I have come up with what I call 9 disruptors. Now, if you want to take a picture of this, you're welcome to. Can they do that? Okay, if you want to take a picture of these 9 disruptors, because this helps you change your mindset. These are not the principles of war, which many of you may understand, but these are things that are disrupting warfare today. Now, let me explain them to you very quickly. First, the transparent battle space. From space to the stratosphere, which is hugely important. By the way, dominating the stratosphere dominates the ground, dominates many domains, land, air, sea. And we don't have forces in the stratosphere yet. We have some that can move there, but we don't have that. So that's interesting. But from the space to the stratosphere to the blue sky all the way down to the ground, we have sensors that cover the battle space. And if you want to find something, those sensors will find you. Now, you can do things to degrade the enemy sensors, but if they're not degraded and they have the capability to do so, they will see you. The Azerbaijanis had their own satellites. They had 2 Azur Sky satellites up during the war. Other nations have satellites. Almost every nation, modern nation on Earth, has some kind of a satellite. Many nations have a lot of military ISR, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance satellites. Sensors are everywhere. The drones that fly through the air, the MALE, the HALE, the small UAS, they see things in ways as you could never see them before. The video I showed you of the Second Nagorno-Karabakh War, that wasn't Hollywood. That was combat footage. Imagine the video from that drone that is taking pictures of those strikes. So there's a drone that's taking pictures of other drones striking. And what did they do with that video? They published it that night. They put it on social media to win the information war. And Armenian mothers and fathers were searching those videos to see if, in fact, their sons had been killed. And it was demoralizing, absolutely demoralizing. So 5 domains we have to fight in: land, sea, air, space, and cyber, but also the info war space, the electromagnetic spectrum. We have to think through all of these. Now, the transparent battle space changes everything. I mentioned earlier infiltration attack. The operational method of the 21st century is going to be infiltration. What? What are you talking about? Okay, so in 2023, the Ukrainians launched a counterattack against the Russians, and what happened? They attacked in the old way, as we trained them, and they died in the old way. It failed because the transparent battle space, the Russians could see where they were, and the Russians could move artillery and drones and sometimes aircraft and helicopters if necessary, although they stay behind the lines. And they used those to destroy the Ukrainians as they were massing. You cannot mass on the modern battle space without being seen. Now, what happened in August of this year? The Ukrainians invaded Russia. Oh my gosh, think about it. We live in a world right now where Russia is being invaded. The Ukrainians invaded Russia. How were they able to do that? Well, that's something we should be studying, and I'm studying it in depth, and I'll tell you, it's amazing what they did. They were able to look at at security cameras in the Kursk Oblast that people owned in their houses to see how many Russians were out there. They cyber hacked those so they could see them. They were able to mask their forces, and I'll talk about masking shortly, so that the Russians didn't know they were massing their forces for an attack. And they attacked with multiple brigades. So the infiltration attack can be done, but it has to be done very smartly. And of course, the Ukrainians didn't tell us they were going to do it because they wanted to keep it a secret, and we can't seem to keep a secret. The next is the first strike advantage, and this is something you all need to be worried about. If you're a member of NATO, any of you are in part of a NATO country, or if you just happen to be up against a bully like, maybe some dictator with a big rocket force, which we have several of them in the world, the enemy is learning that you must strike first with surprise massively. The Russians attacked Ukraine in February 2022, and they struck 2,119 targets in their initial first strike, which lasted about 6 days. It wasn't enough. China watched this and said they didn't do it good enough. They didn't do it hard enough. They didn't do it with enough mass. They should have hit everything, but they didn't want to. The Russians thought that all they had to do was mess the hair up of their little cousins and the Ukrainians would fall in line. Well, that didn't happen. So the first strike is a huge problem. And why is the first strike a huge problem? Anybody here from Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania? Okay, very good. American, British forces, NATO forces are there. How many of them live in underground bunkers? Oh yeah, they don't. They live in peacetime barracks. We are deployed in peacetime configuration all over the world. In Europe, in the Pacific, in the Middle East. Tower 22 this last year, a base, in Syria-Jordan border there, was hit, and our soldiers were killed because they were sleeping in peacetime barracks in a combat zone. What are we thinking? We have to be much harder to kill. Our problem is that if the enemy decides to launch a first strike, they can do tremendous damage. How many of you here have ever been to South Korea? Very good. The United States forces in the Republic of Korea are located in 3 or 4 or 5 areas. And those areas are well known to everyone, in peacetime configuration, and under the ballistic missile threat of North Korea. So at any one time, if they decide to launch, we don't have an iron dome over those folks. So think about it. We could lose 40% of our active duty force if the enemy did a first strike properly. Something to consider. Will they do it? That's another story. Should militaries prepare for this and be ready for it? Absolutely. Because after Pearl Harbor, you can't say, well, we just didn't know. You have to be able to prepare. The next is AI in the tempo of war. Artificial intelligence is changing everything in our lives, and it will continue to do so. Now, many of you, are thinking artificial intelligence like Terminator and artificial general intelligence. There's 3 types of AI. Artificial narrow intelligence, which is what we live with today. This is your smartphone, your computer, stuff that we use in our drones. The next is artificial general intelligence, and that's when we get an artificial intelligence to work at the capacity of a human brain. Now, some people say ChatGPT and other things are getting close to that. Not so much yet. There's a lot of hype, and a lot of people want to make money off of this, so we have to be careful. But it's moving in that direction. Artificial general intelligence, the ability to be able to think like a human being, a machine. The next is artificial superintelligence, and that's when artificial general intelligence get together and make their own intelligence, and that's ASI. We're nowhere there near that yet. We're still in the ANI, artificial narrow intelligence world. But it is having a tremendous difference in warfare, in business, in daily life. How many of you use a paper map to navigate your car from one point to the next? Right, nobody does anymore. In fact, I took one out the other day and my wife and I were laughing because we used to have to plan our trips with paper maps and she would help me navigate. Anybody remember those days? Okay, well, I'm an old guy, so I remember those days. And right now, you don't have to do that. But what if you don't have GPS? What if you don't have that capability? AI is changing everything, but what that does is it speeds things up. So it speeds up your ability to get from point A to point B because you don't have to look at the map and memorize things and write things down, and you just get in the car and go. And you go and you show up, and sometimes you show up at the wrong place and you go, damn, what happened? You know, but you're usually at the right place because you put the wrong address in usually. So it speeds up things. The tempo of war is increased. That means human decision making gets harder. How do you make decisions when your OODA loop, observe, orient, decide, and act loop, is now in real time? You don't have days to make decisions like back in the 18th century. You don't have weeks to make, hours to make decisions like in World War II. You have to make decisions in real time. Or you have to have foresight, the ability to solve problems in the short term and create solutions for the long run, and have enough foresight to give you time, to give you a time advantage. Tough thing to do. Next is top attack. We used to worry about the frontal flank armor of our tank. The front of our tank had to be strong. Then they started to blow us up from the bottom. So we had to have a V-shaped hull, and we had to figure out how to stop them from blowing us up from the bottom. But now everything hits us from the top. And the top is the easiest way to destroy any armored vehicle, any command post, any artillery system. So top attack is very important. You know this, you saw this in the videos. Top attack is changing how we think. We now have to think differently. We have to look up more. We still have a problem with this with some of our leaders. We would have more thinking in this, for instance, if we had direct experience in the U.S. Army of being attacked by this, although we do when you think about Tower 22 and others, and we certainly can learn from Ukraine and from the Middle East. So it is a mindset we have to change. The next is fully autonomous. More and more weapon systems will move to full autonomy. Fully autonomous means that you cannot be jammed easily. Computer vision is part of that. You don't need GPS. But you add the artificial intelligence to the system so that it can attack targets according to its parameters that you gave it. So if you say, I want you to destroy artillery first, or air defense first, and then artillery, and then armor, the system will do that because the artificial intelligence is trained to do that. The next is super swarm. Now, language is important. Definitions are important. Socrates said, you always got to have a quote from Socrates. Socrates said that all understanding starts with definition. All understanding starts with definition. How many times have you gone to a project or tried to do something and the idea was not defined, and you were working on something and someone else was working on something else, and you thought you were working on the same thing, but it wasn't? So start off with defining the issue. All understanding starts with definition. So super swarm is very important. Right now, we have drones that work in groups, in gaggles, in packs, in swarms. Okay, maybe. Swarming is a tactic. Swarming is a tactic where you hit the enemy from multiple directions simultaneously if possible, or at least in real time as rapidly as you can. Any of you ever heard of George Armstrong Custer and the Gallant 7 Cavalry? Maybe. Okay. They got swarmed at a place called the Little Bighorn by the Sioux and a bunch of other Indians. You don't want to be Custer. You do not want to be swarmed. But that's a tactic. A super swarm is different, and this is where we're moving. A super swarm is where you have a cloud of robotic systems. They can be ground and air. They can be also other systems that are not necessarily like small UAS and drones. They could be missiles with communications in them and precision guided systems that attack where you want. But you have a cloud of these, and they move from point A to point B to point C, and they destroy, according to their targeting parameters, everything underneath them. And they're operated by one human. That one human turns them on and directs them, and may turn them off. And they expend themselves until they're gone. Now, that is the ultimate breakthrough weapon for right now. Chinese are working on it. And every time you see one of those beautiful New Year's Eve or 4th of July, a small UAS, dragons in the sky. Why is it always dragons? It worries me. In the sky, you see that. Why is all that happening? That's part of what this is, although that's not yet a super swarm, but it is the beginning. It is the nascent beginning of how that works. So the super swarm will change warfare dramatically, and the first nation that is able to employ it, particularly with surprise in a first strike, would have a tremendous advantage, because after it's used, there are ways to knock things out. There's action, counteraction, but nonetheless, think about this. The first time tanks were used, they had a great effect, but nobody was ready to follow up. First time gas was used on the battlefield in World War I, they were able to have a great effect, but no one was ready for the success that they delivered, so they didn't know how to follow up. Super swarm. The next is a kill web. Again, language is important, definitions are important. We have in our military a thing called a kill chain. All of you should know what a kill chain is. Basically, I see a target, or an observer sees a target, a sensor sees a target, and that information is then relayed through a series of other people, other networked stations. They don't have to be people, they can be robots. And that then is passed to someone who says, yes, fire. Now that kill chain can take a long time, or it can take a shorter time. And we're working hard, for instance, in the US Army, to make our kill chains as fast as possible, but they're not in real time. Now, the interesting thing about a drone that senses and strikes is that it can be in real time. A drone can sense, say, enemy tank, and then attack. And so that can happen in real time. Now, the kill web is different than the kill chain. The kill web is an AI-enabled kill chain. So imagine a simple metaphor. You have an Excel spreadsheet. How many of you love to play with Excel? I don't want to talk with you. Okay, no, it's okay. Excel's good. I'm just kidding. So imagine if you have a column on the left that shows all of the targets that the sensors see. So the sensors see 100 targets, and you have the exact precision location of those 100 targets. Now, the enemy may have more that are masked or hidden somehow, but nonetheless, you have 100 targets that are seen in one column. In the next column, you have all of the systems that can strike those targets and destroy those targets, and it is synchronized in real time. So you never have one in column B that can't destroy one in column A. That is not out of, they're all in range and they're all capable. So if you're going to destroy a truck, maybe you use a switchblade, 300. If you're going to destroy a tank, maybe you use a 600. But the thing is that the kill web will do that automatically. And then the next column is simply, how do you want to execute? Do you want to execute simultaneously? Imagine that. Do you want to execute one every 10 seconds? Do you want to execute one every day? You want to get close to this? You see what the Israelis are doing in the Middle East. The Israelis are getting close to a kill web. Now, we're working on it, and so are the Chinese. The Russians say they are too, but they're kind of busy. So, the next is visualize the battle space. This is a huge problem. It is a problem for AV and other companies because you have to be able to put this in the mind of a commander's vision. How do we do that? Right now, we are at the transition from total digital to analog. When you go to a command post in the US Army or the US Marine Corps, you will see a bunch of digital systems, And then you'll see a paper map on a table, and sometimes they'll have pins stuck in it, just like Napoleon had. No kidding. I know, because I've been there. I go to the field with the Marines and the Army often, and I see this stuff, and I talk with them, and I talk with them about how to do command post structures and how to survive. So our challenge right now is, how do you visualize in 5 domains plus the information war and the electromagnetic spectrum? How does a commander do that? And a commander at all echelons is not equipped right now and assisted to do that in real time. So this is a huge disruptor. If we solve this problem, we have a huge victory. Imagine putting all the systems together where you could actually see how they work. Plus, you cannot do multi-domain maneuver, cross-domain maneuver, unless you can visualize in those domains. So how do you see in cyber? What do you need to see in cyber? At what echelon? What do you see in space? And what echelon do you need to see it? It'd be really good to know, for instance, if you were a humble battalion commander. I commanded a tank battalion on the demilitarized zone in Korea. It was a task force that consisted of almost 1,800 soldiers. I had artillery attached to me, air defense, tanks, and we were going to break through the enemy lines. And we had thought through how we're going to do all this. Imagine if you're a humble battalion commander, how do you see all this in your mind's eye? How do you project all that information that's going on at the front and the rear so that you know how to make the right decisions? And how do you do cross-domain maneuver when you have to think about when's the cyber window, when's the space window? For instance, what if you didn't have a period of time where space assets could give you information and you knew that? That would be valuable to know. Now, we're pretty blessed in the US military that we usually have space assets that will give us information all the time. But what if they're taken out? So all of these things are important to understand, and being able to visualize the battle space is a huge problem. For instance, F-35 pilots have a helmet that puts all this information together. They don't have a bunch of screens. You go to a military headquarters today, how many of you have been to a ground land forces headquarters in the last year? Anybody? Okay, one guy back there. A lot of big screens, huh? Yeah, a lot of big screens. All that brain power together in one place, waiting to be killed. Yeah. So imagine if instead you had an F-35-like helmet for commanders, and they were able to put that information on a visual system, something like the Apple Pro or the HoloLens. This is not beyond our capacity. The next is decision dominance. You put all this together, all the things above, and you're able to develop an OODA loop, an observe, orient, decide, and act loop that can operate in near real time, and therefore your enemy will look as if they are standing still while you punch them 100 times. That's what we want. Now, we need to understand the threat challenges that the West faces. The Russians, the Chinese, the North Koreans, the Iranians. Our soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and Guardians, Coast Guardsmen as well, need to study these, but so do you. You see, if you don't know anything about them, the adversary, you don't know anything about your system. Because you have to know what the adversary has. So it's important to study these. And I talk to American military leaders all the time. For instance, how many of you know what the standard artillery round is of the Chinese military, of the PLA, the People's Liberation Army? Anybody got a guess? Come on, be brave. This is your opportunity. So how many, raise your hand if you think it's 122, 122 millimeter. Anybody know what that is? Okay, that's our artillery piece, okay? What about a 152? All right, very good. You think it's 152. You would be shocked to find out that it's 155. You know why? About 12 years ago, they decided to copy American rounds, and they could develop 155 faster with the information they were stealing from us. I'm sorry, that they were learning, okay? And so they decided to go 155, which is interesting because they can't interoperate with the Russian army the same way, because the Russian army is 152. Now, that's a very small piece of information. Every U.S. military leader should know that. Just ask them that question the next time you're together with them. See if they know. We need to study these guys. And if we're not studying these guys, if you don't study the enemy, you don't know war. You are not preparing, and you make weapons of war and also weapons of peace. You make the weapons that will help us develop deterrence, but you can't deter an enemy unless you know what the enemy has. Are you studying these wars? These are 5 conflicts that you should know about. Every one of you should know about these. And the more you know about them, the better you'll be able to do your job. I know you're saying, wait a minute, I'm an engineer or I'm a marketing guy or whatever. I don't want to study history. Well, this is war, and this is why you need to know these things. The first is the Second Nagorno-Karabakh War in 2020. Again, 44-day decisive victory. You don't know about that war. You don't know how war has changed dramatically. When it happened, I started talking about it. I started briefing people on it, and they had never heard of it. They hadn't studied it. And to this day, many people have not studied it. The next is the Israeli-Hamas war of 2021. No, not the war that's going on now. The one that happened for 11 days in 2021, where the Israelis were able to put together as near to a kill web as has ever been seen, and drove Hamas immediately to beg for a ceasefire. And since the situation was different, the ceasefire came about. Then you have the ongoing Russo-Ukrainian war, which has more lessons every day for us to learn from than you could imagine. We need to learn from this war and understand what's going on. If you wanted to give one word for how the Ukrainians are fighting, one word that describes the Ukrainian way of war, what would that word be? Innovation. They innovate. They don't take 2 years to get a system out. They do something now. They have to fight today. Innovation. The next is the Middle East war that started October 7th last year and is still going on. And that war has some tremendous lessons for us because the Israeli Defense Forces are putting together, as close as we can see anywhere in the world, what I call multi-domain operations combined arms. They are integrating drones and systems across the spectrum in a way that is diminishing their casualties and giving them greater lethality. Now, the Ukrainians are also learning how to do this. So both of these are vital to study. And then the Red Sea. What's going on in the Red Sea is ridiculous. We have a proxy of Iran that has stopped 13% of the transfer of commerce in the world, and we're allowing it to happen. I don't think it'll last much longer. I think you're going to see that conflict end pretty quick. But that is really important because what have we been doing for the last year or so? We have an archer who's shooting arrows at us, and we're batting down the arrows. We're not attacking the archer. Well, eventually an arrow is going to get through and sink one of our ships because it's the law of averages. And they get smarter every time they do it. So we need to study that conflict and learn from it. Now, I want you to understand this concept because it is crucial to what you do and how you make things, because it is basically a new principle of war. Now, don't get all up in action here. When I say principles of war to the military guys, they go, "You can't change the principles of war." And I go, "Okay, what if I added one?" "You can't add the principles of war." I say, "Okay, let's just consider this then." All right, because the principles of war can change and have changed over the years, but somehow we think they're immutable, and that's not true. Now, here we go. Masking. Masking is so important. It is not the Russian maskarovka. Кто говорит по-русски? Nobody? Okay. Maskarovka is a Russian idea, which basically is camouflage and hiding. But this is more than this. Masking, we need to embrace the full spectrum, multi-domain effort to deceive enemy sensors and disrupt enemy targeting. So you want to see offense and defense with drones? Deceive their sensors. How many of your drones deceive their enemy sensors? Now you say, we don't know what sensors they have. Yes, you do if you know your enemy. They have not unlimited stuff. No one has unlimited. Everyone has a finite number of things. Now, they might surprise you. They might have things that are hidden, but some of it's known. So deceive those sensors. And if you can deceive those sensors, then they can't target you as well. That's where we need to go. And then disrupt their targeting. Figure out a way so that if they do come in, they miss. They're 15 meters, 100 meters off. Because when you do it, you deflect them. There are systems out there that have tried to do this over the years. The Russians in particular were developing some. We need to think through this. There's a whole series of things that could happen. For instance, what if you could take an RFID tag like such thing that was passive and throw them all over the battle space, and a drone goes by with computer vision, goes, aha, look at that. That's an enemy gun. No, it's not. It's just a little thing. So there's a lot of ways to disrupt their targeting and deceive their sensors, but it's a mindset, and we need to change our thinking. We need to mask or we'll die, and we need to mask in these areas: in the optical, the thermal, the electronic, the acoustic, and the quantum. Yeah, no kidding. Now, let's start off with the first four. The optical. How do you mask in the optical spectrum? Anybody here? Yes, sir, you're right. Camouflage. Well said. Thank you. Okay, so you camouflage. So we ought to be the best in the world at camouflage. And by the way, we ought to camouflage our systems if we can, right? Why have a big shiny silver bullet if you don't need a silver bullet? The next is thermal. How do we mask in the thermal spectrum? Yes, ma'am, you are exactly right. Well said. Good job. You blend into your background. So you figure out a way that your heat is a little bit lower or higher, and it blends into the background. And there are certain times during the day when that happens almost automatically, early in the morning, late at night, thermal wave, changeover. Understanding all this can help you mask in the thermal spectrum. The next is electronic. Yes, sir, you did it. Exactly right. Electronic. That's right, you. You didn't know it. Yep, you're still looking at me like you didn't answer me. You did. Okay, electronic. The electronic way. This is an electronic picture. This is a picture of who is speaking on the radio. The highest level of electronic transmission is in red. If you are the enemy commander and you have long-range precision fires, where do you send your missiles and your drones? Against the red. Because that's where you'll kill all the commanders and their command posts. This was a picture of a Armored Brigade combat team at the National Training Center, Fort Irwin, California, not far from here. A great place. You ought to visit it. I spent several years of my life there. I was the Op-4 commander, the red team Top Gun commander, if you will, of the enemy. So I was the Russian commander fighting all of our forces all the time at the NTC. It was like Valhalla. You fight every day and you fight with lasers, but you never die. You come back and fight again. But it was great training. You learn a lot. But this is at the National Training Center, a picture of an American brigade, and this is where their most level of transmission was, and that's where the enemy would attack. And then acoustic. Acoustic sensors on drones can be very powerful. They're passive, and with an acoustic sensor, you can hear the crack of the guns, you can hear the sound of the cannon, the launch of a missile, the flight of an aircraft, and you can then find out its location by triangulating on that with several drones or different systems. So passive. And by the way, the Ukrainians are using acoustic sensors on 6-foot poles around some of their most important targets spread out for miles, so that when the Shahed 136 Russian drones come in that were made in Iran, when they come in, they hear them with the acoustic sensors, pass that information with complete flight data on direction, speed, and everything else, altitude, and then they set up their anti-aircraft guns to shoot them down. Acoustic sensors are very inexpensive compared to other high-speed, low-drag sensors that you might think of. And then lastly, quantum. Now, quantum is exquisite right now. The Chinese are using quantum sensors to find U.S. stealth aircraft. But a lot of power, special systems, not too many, hard to do right now. 10 years from now, I'm not so sure. We may have a battle space that could be actually seeded with quantum snowflakes. Imagine a whole set battle space where everything that moves or has heat or has vibration or electronics gives its position away to these quantum sensors. So masking is crucial. We need to understand it, and you can't build a system if you don't consider it. Okay, we don't have any sound. Don't you find somebody to love you. That one picture of the Russian commander on the BMP that's running away before the drone strikes, and he shoots the shotgun at the drone. He missed. The drone killed him. That's the last act of desperation. That was a first-person view drone, Ukrainian drone, that took him down. War is changing. We need to understand it. And we can look back at history to understand why it's changing and why it's important. During World War I, the British Army started the war with only 2 machine guns per regiment. 2. Per infantry battalion, per infantry battalion. And 1 gun was a spare, which means basically they had no idea what machine guns were when they started the war. Could you imagine today going to war without machine guns? In World War I, machine guns were a very, very critical weapon. And by 1916, things had changed dramatically. Red July 1916, the Battle of the Somme. This is a tremendously sad day. 60,000 casualties in one day. 27,000 dead. 27,000 dead. And then the rest casualties. Just imagine having to take care of all those casualties, let alone recover the dead. And that was done by a precision weapon manned by a human called a machine gun. Now, mortars and other things and bombs and artillery were used, but most of the killing was by machine guns. Now we move forward to Red October 2024. The Russian army has lost 40,000, mostly to drones, in 1 month. Their casualties are almost 1,300 a day. Now that's not all dead, but that is a tremendous amount of casualties, and you can only sustain that so long. And this is mostly by drones. Think about that. The drone is the machine gun of the 21st century. Change our mindset.
Today, Ukrainian drones managed to blow up dozens of Russian armored vehicles in the Donetsk region. Ukrainian forces have just deployed an FPV, or first-person view, attack drone to blow up a column of Russian armored vehicles. A video shared by the Defense Ministry on X, formerly Twitter, shows a Ukrainian drone blowing up 11 Russian armored columns, including 3 T-72 tanks, 7 armored fighting vehicles, and an infantry fighting vehicle. The Ministry of Defense stated, "Are FPV drones effective on a battlefield?" The warriors from the 72nd Mechanized Brigade, with the help of drones, turned a convoy of Russian tanks and IFVs into a scrap metal army. The attack took place near the settlement of Novomikhailivka in Ukraine's Donetsk region, which Russia has been trying to seize since October. Cameras mounted on the attack drone and drones flying above it captured the attack. The convoy maneuvered close to front lines along eastern Ukraine and became vulnerable to rapid and well-targeted artillery fire and drone strikes. Russia can make 100 tanks a month, thus allowing it to maintain its offensive efforts at the same level despite suffering heavy losses.
Think about the cost of a tank versus the cost of an FPV drone. So what kind of drones do we have out there right now in war? We have ISR drones, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, needed because you must see the enemy and you take videos of all these other things. This helps with the transparent battle space. The next you have bomber drones. These are drones that drop grenades on people, on positions. When a tank crew gets hit by a first-person view drone, particularly a Russian tank in Ukraine, what is the first thing if the Russian crew is still alive? What do? Exactly right. They abandon tank. They get out of that tank as fast as possible. Do you think they close the hatch when they leave? No, they don't close the hatch. They run. Everybody goes as fast as you can. So the troops are gone. The crew is gone, if there's any that left, that any survived. But then that tank is sitting out there, and maybe it's smoldering, but it's not destroyed. And if you recover a tank, you can fix it. But you take an FPV bomber drone and you go right over the top of it and you drop that grenade right into the hatch, and it sets off all the ammunition inside, and that tank cannot be fixed after that. You clean up the battlefield with these things. Absolutely amazing tactic. The next is the first-person view drone. One of the most accurate killers right now in Ukraine is the first-person view drone. Why? Because the first-person view drone is controlled by a human mind. One mind, one drone. The next are loitering munitions. Very important. They will become absolutely decisive, and the better they get, the more decisive they'll become. They can hover over an area for a long period of time and give you a saturation over time so that the enemy is denied those areas. The next is unmanned combat aerial vehicles of all types, UCAVs. You may remember back in the Second Nagorno-Karabakh War, and even the beginning of the Ukrainian invasion, about the Bayraktar TB2. A very effective Turkish drone that was not that expensive, that flew but had missiles on its wings. So it's a robotic airplane that shoots missiles. And this was very effective because it was able to get far deep into enemy territory and then shoot those missiles very accurately. So we have many different types of drones. Now, the democratization of these drones, in other words, the fact that anybody can get them now, including terrorists and assassins, cheap and attritable, changes almost everything, and it changes warfare. If we think it doesn't, we are not thinking. We are not looking at what's happening in the world and at war right now. And what that takes, for instance, like with an FPV drone or a bomber drone like this illustration shows, is goggles, the ability to control it. One guy is controlling it, so he is the mind of the drone, and the other guy is looking at the overall situation on a tablet, and he may, in addition, have a drone sensor. How many of you here ever heard of the sUAS? Okay, you all need to know about it, and you all need to get one. I'll talk about it a little bit later. Now, this is Darwin. Darwin is one of the best drone operators in the Ukrainian army. Okay, he's in Aerozvidka, which is the Ukrainian drone corps. Now, the Ukrainians were very smart in creating a drone corps because no matter what anyone tells you, millennials or others cannot pick up a drone and operate it perfectly immediately. It takes training. Imagine the training it takes to operate a drone at night, in smoke, through a forest, in a built-up area, while the enemy's trying to jam you and they're shooting at you. Now, Darwin, he comes to work around 1700, 5 p.m., gets into a bunker. He has 60 drones that his team will put out for him one at a time. And out of those 60 drones, he might get 16 to 20 hits, and the rest are wasted. The rest are lost. Now, we don't see a lot of the videos of the drones that fail. That's not a good video. They only show you the videos of the ones that succeed, but this guy gets 16 to 20 hits a night.
Плюс. Мій позивний Дарвін.
In Ukraine's struggle for survival emerges a new species of soldier, part human, part killer drone. His body is in a concrete bunker, but his mind, thanks to those goggles, is flying free, searching for something to destroy.
Ну, ти дійсно почуваєш себе птахом. В кінці взривається. Це ж просто неймовірно.
So, very effective. Imagine the cost of the ROI of a first-person view drone against 16 tanks. Now, a year ago, the Ukrainians said they were using 10,000 drones a month. That means they were expending 10,000 small UAS a month. How many drone operators does that mean? Not 10,000, but a lot. How many drone operators do we have in the US military? How many drone operators do we have in the UK military? In units, in infantry battalions, in infantry brigades, in armored brigades? Think about that. Not enough? Hardly any, which is the sad part. Now, today, it's 50K per month. That's what they're expending. And that's just an average. So right now, with the massive Russian attacks, they're probably expending more. And they're not going to tell us the exact number right now. Now, some of these drones are big like this one. This drone, for instance, can drop an anti-tank mine, which is a pretty powerful piece of kit. You drop that on a tank and it'll blow it up. Or you go down a road and you lay them on the road behind enemy lines. And when the enemy begins to move, they don't know there's a minefield there because there wasn't one there yesterday. And they're moving in the dark because if they don't move in the dark, they get killed because they're trying to hide the sensors. So everything's movement in the dark now. You move in the day, you're just waiting to be killed. You got to be harder to kill. So you go at night.
Drones are the future. This is a drone war, really.
Это рабочая лошадка этой войны.
This is the workforce of this war.
When one soldier sitting 2 kilometers away flies one drone into the sky, it performs the function of a whole reconnaissance company.
Our presence for us.
So, for the U.S. military, this author, who wrote in a popular military site called War in the Rocks, in March of this year, said the adoption of the machine gun in World War I is an apt analogy for the integration of small unmanned aerial systems in the U.S. military. As with the adoption of the machine gun, failure of vision, traditionalism, and bureaucratic resistance are leading to insufficient numbers and delayed force modernization. Now, the leaders of our military will take umbrage with this and say, we're doing all sorts of things, and look what we're doing here, and look what we're doing here. And my question to them is always, what do we have to fight the war tomorrow? Don't talk to me about 2030 and 2040. What do we have to fight tomorrow? And you need to ask the same thing from your countries. What do you have to fight tomorrow if you had to? How many drone operators are trained? Do you have a drone supply line? Do you have people trained? Are we going to do this as a piece of equipment? You know, like just a piece of ammunition? And if so, do you really think they're going to maximize the capability of that drone because you put it in their hands and they have an hour to play with it?
Drive.
So the Russians are moving toward motorcycle messengers because they're being eavesdropped on by the Ukrainians. And if you want to pass out information for a secret operation, you can do it by messenger. But the drones can take down motorcyclists. That's how accurate and fast they are. But he never knew it was coming. So President Zelensky says that Ukraine will now produce 4 million drones a year, and they're making this in a cottage industry in Ukraine. They're building them in homes, in small little household factories. Kind of amazing. And some of these are printed with 3D printing. One Ukrainian soldier said this, and it's worth reading. He said, there is a difference in war now. In 2022, similar to 2014, you would finish military education, become a Marine, super muscular, bench pressing 200 kilograms, a cool guy that no one compared to. But nowadays, this cool guy walks through the trench, and an 18, 19-year-old kid who grew up playing Counter-Strike and Need for Speed is piloting an FPV drone and takes out the Marine. And that's it. War is changing. We need to change our mindset. You need to read this. This 25-year-old Timothy Orel was given the Hero of Ukraine Award just recently. He has killed 434 Russian soldiers. 346 were wounded. 42 tanks. 44 BMPs, those are infantry fighting vehicles. 10 MTLBs, those are APCs. And 28 BTR APCs. One guy with first-person view drones. If we had an Apache crew that did this, they would be making movies about them. Think about the ROI here. This guy has a tremendous effect on the battle space. He is a trained killer. And it took a lot of training to get him to be able to do this effectively. War is changing dramatically. So drones are the machine gun of the 21st century. They claim the tactical high ground. Just as high ground is always important, now you have the high ground that is in the air. And they also act as aerial cavalry, reconnaissance, and also being able to do delaying actions and attack, and flying artillery. They hold the power to decide between survival and annihilation in the modern battlefield.
This, say Ukrainian military analysts, is the world's first recorded strike on a Russian helicopter by a drone. It happened, they say, near Kursk in western Russia, as Ukrainian ground forces made a surprise attack across the border. Up to now, this sort of precise targeting would have been very difficult and easily countered by jamming the drone's GPS signal. But the war in Ukraine is rapidly accelerating drone technology. Artificial intelligence, AI, is about to revolutionize how UAVs operate, with the aircraft themselves seeing the battlefield below, navigating their own route, and even visually acquiring particular targets.
So you saw in that picture, one of the soldiers of that team had a Sukhorok. This is a very inexpensive device. It is a passive receiver that is set to drone frequencies. And it warns you with an audio alert that drones are overhead. Why don't all of our soldiers have these? Why don't we have these with some of our systems? If you're going to deploy drones, you are in fact the biggest target for the enemy because they want to hunt you down and kill you before you launch your drones. You should have something like this. Now, this is just one device. The Ukrainians made it. It doesn't cost a lot. It's passive.
We learned when somebody's back is up against the wall, they come up with a lot of creative solutions. And if they don't have a lot of money, like Ukraine doesn't, they can figure it out.
Speaking at the 2024 Air and Space Forces Association Symposium, General James Hecker, who works in NATO Air Command, detailed what the US is learning from the war in Ukraine and how it will change warfare going into the future.
We give them some exquisite weapons, some things that are pretty expensive, but that's not going to do it alone. And I think we're finding that out as well as the United States Air Force, that we just can't concentrate on the exquisite because we don't have enough money to buy all the exquisite stuff that we need. So we have to also bring some low-end stuff.
The war in Ukraine is entering its third year, and Europe's second biggest country is short of manpower and ammunition. And according to Ukraine's Minister for Digital Transformation, Mikhailo Fedorov, in certain areas of the front, FPV or first-person view drones are destroying more targets than artillery.
Отлично, есть. These are the drones where the operator wears goggles and then flies them like a kamikaze into the target. So the unarmed drone would first find it, and then they would send up the fast racer to go and actually strike it.
So here are some key questions for you. What are we learning from recent wars? More importantly, what are you learning from recent wars? Are you studying them? If you're not, think about it. If you're going to make an iPhone, you're going to make a smartphone, you're studying the market. So studying the market is very important. Understanding wars, you're going to develop drones for military use, very important. Next, when will we embrace drone warfare in our doctrine? Ask this of any military force that you have. Where's our drone doctrine? What do we do if we're attacked by drones? How do we use drones in the offense? I don't want a technical manual on how to use a drone. I want to know how it's used in units, platoons, companies, battalions, how it's used on ships, how it's used to defend airfields. Where's the doctrine being written? By the way, it doesn't cost very much to write doctrine. It takes thinking and some dedicated people. But if you don't have that first, if you don't start thinking through how to use them, and you just get a bunch of tools, you'll end up with a whole bunch of stuff. You won't know how to use it. And you can do most of this in very active and credible red teaming exercises. And I teach people red teaming all the time. If you ever want to talk to me about how you could red team this, just come see me. The next, do we have a mindset and the TTP? TTP stands for tactics, techniques, and procedures. So, for instance, if you think about it, if you're a command post, battalion or brigade size command post, and you get attacked by drones, what is your battle drill? Now you say, that's not my job, that's the Army's job. But think about it, that impacts your equipment on how they're going to do things. What is their battle drill? You'll find they don't have one. This is very dangerous. This is very sad. Thinking needs to happen. The next, how will we integrate drones into our training and formations? Do we need a drone corps in the U.S. Army? Do we need at least a military occupational specialty that says you're a drone operator? And we have some, but we're not using them for small UAS quite the way that the Ukrainians are. So there's a lot of lessons to be learned from both Ukraine and the Israeli Defense Forces. How will we address drones as ammunition? Will we address drones as ammunition or create a drone corps? Basically building on what I just said. In other words, what should we do to get the human factor aligned behind the weapon system? When we had the machine gun, we just didn't throw machine guns out to people and say, use them. You say, well, that's easy. Machine guns are simple to use. If you never saw a machine gun before in World War I, you didn't know how to use it, and you certainly didn't know how to use it tactically. So it's really important to train people. The human operator is still vital. When will we develop multi-domain operation combined arms? Bots before boots ought to be your war cry. Robots before humans. If that's the case, when military formations do live fire training, they have a platoon exercise, a battalion exercise, a company exercise. Why aren't the targets being seen by drones first and then information relayed to them in real time? Where's the integration between drones and our forces? That should be happening right now. And we can do this even if we don't have the drones. We could fake it, but at least it would be part of our mindset. But we need to figure out how to actually have the drones give real-time information to a tank crew before they engage an enemy tank that is off beyond the hill. When will we develop a mass drone super swarm? If we do, that will become a war winner. At least it will become a decisive weapon at the opening of a war. And then lastly, what can you do? I tell my listeners all the time, don't tell me what you can't do. Tell me what you can do. Now, I've written a couple of books about this. I suggest that you check them out. 7 Seconds to Die is about the Second Nagorno-Karabakh War. It's about the only book written about the Second Nagorno-Karabakh War. The next is the next war, which I have a copy over here for. How many of you here read 10 books a year? Okay, raise your hand. You do? Sir, I'm going to give you this book signed. There you go. Oh, well, thank you. Very good. So my suggestion is you read to lead. If you're not reading, why not? Here's some articles you can get off the internet. All you have to do is put my name in and these titles: 10 Rules of Masking, 21 Command Post Maxims. It'll give you a tactical sort of operational view of what some of the challenges are. Download them for free. Put in my name, Antal, A-N-T-A-L, and these titles, and you'll get them. Also, I'm considered in the Army a mad scientist. No kidding. They have a thing called the Mad Scientist, and I do these podcasts for them every now and then. I'm not in the Army anymore. I'm retired. I'm always in the Army, but I'm just retired. I'm not under their pay is what I'm saying. But what I do is I do this for free, and I do this because I want them to think. And this one in particular was a worst case scenario that everyone should think about. So I have just been told that I am not only out of time, but they're going to yank me off. So I've talked to you for a while about how we need to change our mindset. Remember this, we do not rise to the level of our expectations. We fall to the level of our training. And our training level in some of these areas in our military forces is extremely low. So we have a lot of work to do, and you are part of the solution. So thank you very much for listening. You've been very kind in listening to me, and I appreciate that. And I'll be happy to take any questions if we have any time left. If not, I'll do it after the presentation. Thank you.